They say time heals all wounds, but what if some wounds never fade? What if the regrets, the losses, and the people we once held close still haunt us in our quietest moments? This is a story about life, about letting go, and about the painful truth we all face as we age. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you might just see life and yourself differently. The weight we leave behind. Harold sat on the old wooden bench outside his house, staring at the vast sky tinged with hues of orange and pink. The days had begun to feel longer, quieter. Retirement was supposed to be peaceful, but in his mind, there was still too much noise. Regrets whispered in his ears. Old friendships haunted him, and resentment curled around his heart like ivy on a forgotten wall. He had spent 70 years collecting memories, but not all of them were ones he wanted to keep. Some clung to him like heavy chains, dragging him deeper into solitude. He closed his eyes, allowing his thoughts to drift back to the moments that shaped him. Letting go of regret. It was 1968, and he was 23. Young, ambitious, and reckless. He had turned down a chance to reconcile with his father before the old man passed away. Pride had stood between them, an unspoken war of words neither was willing to surrender. Even now, Harold could hear his mother's voice, pleading with him to make peace. He had ignored her, and now all that remained was silence. For years, he carried that regret like a stone in his chest. He would replay the scenario, imagining different outcomes. What if he had called? What if he had just walked through that door and said, "I forgive you"? But the past is a stubborn thing. It never bends to our wishes. One day, while visiting the cemetery, he found himself speaking to the gravestone. "I was angry," he admitted, "but I never stopped loving you." As he spoke, the weight lifted, not entirely, but enough for him to breathe easier. He understood then, regret only has power if you let it. And so, he chose to leave it behind. Letting go of meaningless relationships. Life had a strange way of revealing who truly mattered. At one time, Harold had been surrounded by people. Friends from work, neighbors, old classmates. He had spent decades maintaining these ties out of habit. But with age came clarity. There was Mike, who only called when he needed something. There was Richard, who never had a kind word to say. And then there were the countless acquaintances who had faded in the background, their conversations nothing more than hollow pleasantries. One day, while sipping his morning coffee, he had an epiphany. Why was he still holding on? Relationships, like seasons, were meant to change. Some people were meant to stay, and others were just passing through. So, he let them go, not with anger, but with acceptance. He stopped returning calls that drained him. He declined invitations that felt obligatory. And in doing so, he made space for the relationships that truly mattered, the ones that lifted his spirit rather than weighed him down. Letting go of resentment. Perhaps the hardest thing to release was resentment. Harold had carried his share, tucked away like old letters in a forgotten drawer. There was resentment toward an old boss who had overlooked him for a promotion. Resentment toward a childhood friend who had betrayed him. Resentment toward himself for the mistakes he had made. But the thing about resentment is that it doesn't punish the person who wronged you. It only poisons the one who holds on to it. One afternoon, Harold found himself watching birds in the park. A young boy was struggling to untangle a kite caught in the branches. The more he yanked, the tighter the string became. Frustrated, The boy finally let go, and in doing so, the wind carried the kite free. Harold smiled to himself. Maybe life was like that. Maybe the only way to be free was to stop pulling against the past and simply let go. That evening, he took out a notepad and wrote letters to those he had held grudges against. He never intended to send them, but writing them felt like setting down a heavy burden. "I forgive you," he wrote, "not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." As the days turned into years, Harold felt lighter. The past still existed, but it no longer controlled him. The people who mattered remained, and those who didn't had faded away like autumn leaves in the wind. And as for resentment, well, that was just another weight he had learned to leave behind. Harold leaned back on the bench, watching the last traces of sunlight disappear beyond the horizon. He had spent a lifetime carrying burdens that were never meant to be held forever. Now, he finally understood the secret to a peaceful life. Let go and live, embracing the present, with the past no longer shackling him. Harold found himself more present than ever before. The sound of the wind rustling the trees, the distant laughter of children playing, even the warmth of the sun on his skin. These were things he had once overlooked in his constant dwelling on yesterday. One morning, he decided to take a different path on his daily walk. It led him through a quiet park he had never explored. There, he met an elderly woman named Margaret, who was feeding the pigeons. She smiled warmly and patted the bench beside her. "You look like a man with stories to tell." For the first time in a long time, Harold wasn't lost in memories or regrets. He was simply here in the moment, sharing laughter and stories with someone new. As they talked, he realized that life was still unfolding, still offering moments of connection, joy, and meaning. From that day on, Harold made it a point to embrace the present. He took pleasure in small things, a well-brewed cup of tea, a favorite song on the radio, a friendly conversation with a stranger. The weight of the past had lifted, and in its place was something lighter, something beautiful, the freedom to truly live. Harold smiled, watching the world around him, no longer a prisoner of what once was. He had let go, and now he was finally free. Harold smiled as a gentle breeze brushed against his face. He had spent a lifetime carrying the past, but now, with open hands and an open heart, he welcomed the present. He was no longer defined by what he had lost, but by the life he had chosen to embrace. And for the first time in years, he felt truly alive.